Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As an evangelist, I have the opportunity to work globally with thought leaders in the field. And I'm extremely proud and happy today to have on my side, who is the head of design digital products at Accenture Song.
Yeah, we don't like short job titles. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we tried to shorten it, it didn't work. So one of the things that today we're talking a lot about AI, but when I'm looking back at like the past few years, companies struggle in general with setting up their innovation framework to drive innovation. In your role, you work with a lot of different companies to drive forward innovation. If you would just name a couple of things, what are the biggest blockers in being successful there?
Honestly, people's op model tends to be the biggest problem with them getting anything innovative out the door. All of us know that the best way to actually manifest anything that's innovative, that's new, is to get it in front of your customers at the first possible opportunity, test it, learn from them, refine it. But we tend to think we've hit the nail on the head if we've got, say, really well integrated design and product teams. And we forget that actually to get out the door, the people you need to have on board that need to be enablers and not blockers are the people like legal and compliance and finance, who are actually going to let you get your product in market in a way that's meaningful, that you can test it and learn from it. When it's done well, all of those people solving the same mission and answering the same question is just exceptionally powerful.
Would you have an example of a company that has adopted this operational model, basically bringing all the stakeholders in at the start to deliver something groundbreaking?
So I think my favorite, and the one that actually scares a good deal of my clients still, is Revolut. They set out to answer the question of how can we make opening a bank account easier? Like, how can we make this ridiculous process that is steeped in mythology about all this regulation and compliance that you need to have around it? How can we make this simpler? And they didn't do that by you could have done that by trying to get the likes of me, who's a designer in heritage, and my best mate Tom, who's an engineer, in a room. We'd come up with something that was really beautiful, but it wouldn't actually hit all the compliance on the head. They did that by putting everyone in the same room and saying, let's find the edges. Let's find the edges of the regulatory space that we exist in, and let's go there. Let's see how we can strip this back as much as we possibly can. Let's still be compliant, but let's do something that really works for customers. And that, they just carry on going from strength to strength, even as they grow in that perspective.
So I can imagine, so prior to Miro, I was actually 7 years in consulting, and I was a director in technology and innovation. Big company, and one of the sayings we had, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? It's like onboarding those potential enablers at the start could also significantly slow your process down. But I do recognize that once you have your products and they are the blockers, they become the real blockers, and you have to start your design over again.
Yeah.
At a larger scale, bringing everyone to the table, do you have another example that you can share, like where it has been successful?
I think my favorite one is probably, and I know it was pandemic fueled, the work that we did with the NHS during COVID. Wasn't just us, it was a team effort, it was a badgeless school in there. So Accenture were there, Deloitte were there, some of you were probably there on PRS contracts as well. The mission was simple: let's stop people dying of COVID, but it involved bringing so many complex stakeholder groups together to actually solve those single questions, to unite around what are the things that we will need to have done to mean that we've got a joined up vaccination process that really works digitally in 6 months' time. It was also just completely essential, and I know you're from Miro, and so forgive this, but it was completely essential in that scenario to have a single source of truth, and that's something that we often miss in an innovation culture. We have people who think they're answering the same question, but aren't actually held to account. They don't get the detail around that question right. The whole lot was run off Miro boards. We had people hither and thither in various different physical locations, various different professions, who are all held to this central source of what are we doing every day, even when you were finding out the new policy requirements from the Guardian website in the morning rather than from a minister.
Nice. So if we are going to take this now to the point of Gen AI, if we're looking at all the amazing opportunities out there, and you're working with many companies and helping them to embark on this journey, like what are the key learnings for you and that you can share for companies who really want to embrace this?
Yeah, so I think we've heard quite a lot of them already today. There have been some amazing speakers here. But we've done 700 projects so far that are just straight Gen AI. So we use it a lot to generate code and generate content with clients. But straight up, like, what can we do with generative AI? The three big things that we found is that you have to have a focus on value, business value, customer value. It's worth remembering in an age when generation of stuff is suddenly so easy that the most heralded products of all time have been the ones that are the simplest. It's so easy to be seduced and distracted by how much you can generate rather than thinking about the problem that you can solve with what you are generating. The second one is, if you haven't done it already, put it on your priority list tomorrow. You've got to build the foundations now. Your digital core has got to be ready for this, whether you do it through your platform partners, whether you build proprietary models. But this is coming. It's coming at exponential pace. It is going to accelerate what you can do as organizations. But if you haven't got the foundations right now, you're going to really struggle to integrate it onto your stack. And the third one, and Dan touched on this as well, there isn't a Gen AI ready workforce out there. It's not something that you can go and hire for in its straightest form. So you've got to train, you've got to experiment, and you've got to create the right trust environment with your workforce that means that they don't think that you are going to fire them if they get the Gen AI problem right. We did a lovely survey of all the people that we'd worked with across these 700 different companies. We found that 70% of employees really thought that Gen AI would make them more exceptional in their job. And we asked it in that way, like, do you think it's going to make you slightly better, a bit better, or exceptional at your job? I think this is going to make me exceptional at my job. Only 3% of the same employees surveyed trusted their organizations not to fire them because of it. And so creating that culture around Gen AI that is trusted and something that you're working on with your talent is really important.
Nice. So if I'm thinking back of the answers you gave earlier, right? It's like the operating model is the biggest blocker normally for driving innovation forward, and thereby as well doing things with Gen AI. So in that sense, we are too late embarking all the stakeholders that can actually make it happen, make it work. Right? So instead of treating them as blockers, making them enablers, bringing them to the first place. You gave the example about Revolut, where they have been successful. After that, you spoke about NHS, where also within larger organizations, it's beneficial to actually bring them forward, but also to create this single point of truth environment. So a workspace basically to drive that innovation. And right now, when I get out of view, it's like, it's all about focusing on the value. It's about focus on your talent. Make sure that your talent is being trusted, set the right culture there, but also train them up, I would assume. And then sort out your architecture.
Yeah. And I think that's the key takeaway right now. It would be so easy, and it is so easy to be seduced and distracted by what has just become available at our fingertips. It's all about focus for the next 6 months. Focus on enabling yourselves, focus on the talent, and focus on what value you're actually trying to drive out of this.
Well, we have within Miro what works really well for us in that sense. It's called painted picture. So what we have is that our leadership works together with other people in our organization to basically set the mission for the upcoming time with a very clear picture on what we want to achieve. So we can experiment, we can drive new things, but always have the customer needs in front of us and aligned with the organization goals.
Yeah.
How do you do this within Accenture?
I mean, our customers are our clients, and it gets complicated because then they end up twofold. So I do a lot of work with the public sector, so you have to think about everyone, and a lot of work in financial services as well. So you think primarily about your first line of customer, which is your clients, and they are constantly in the forefront of our thoughts. Like, how do we drive value for these people? How do we help them in what is a genuinely confusing and sticky situation? But then on the ground with them, how do we support them to drive value for their customers? I mean, I still do the old-fashioned things of trying to distill it down to a sentence that you can put on the wall in front of your team just to say, this is the thing we are trying to do right now. Get it down to one single aim that everyone can repeat. So if someone walks into that project room, they say, so what are you doing here? We are going to make it easier for every single person to move their bank accounts globally. Like, just get it down so that everyone knows what direction they're driving in. And I think that clarity of focus has always helped and will always help, especially in a more complex tech environment.
Thank you. So basically, I want to open the floor as well to you. If you have any questions, For me, at least, the key learnings have been is that if you don't have the foundation in place, if you don't have the hygiene, if you do not bring the stakeholders that are actually the enablers all the way to the front, then you can dream about doing things with Gen AI, but you're not going to be successful. And on top of that, put your customer needs in front. Just developing propositions with Gen AI, it's great, but if it's not focused on the customer needs, then you're not going to be successful. Is there anyone here who would like to ask a question? Yes, please.
Justine with Center for Synchronous Leadership. Thank you. I appreciate your choices for.
Hang on just a sec. Let's get a mic so everyone can hear what we're saying.
Thank you. Justine Lutrod, Center for Synchronous Leadership. I appreciate, and also the just sort of the clarity of the value, foundations, environment for your employees. I want to focus on this last one, the environment for your employees, because I think it is really important. I think there are a lot of binary narratives right now about AI as either being all good or all bad. And there is this reality that you're going to need people to work with you to identify where the value can actually be and all of that. But just being a little bit devil's advocate and realist, so you don't end up lying to people. Because I see stories about how actually everyone can come on the journey, but can everyone come on the journey? Because if it succeeds, won't it, or isn't a possibility that there might be less jobs? So how do you sort of think about that sort of gray area where you don't know there might be less jobs because your employees who have been working very hard for you have been successful?
Yeah, and that is an inherent risk. Every time we see a new piece of technology hit the floor, we thought it was going to happen with things like chatbots. But actually, it meant that we were just able to more seamlessly pass between different kinds of service type. Yes, it took some cost out of the call centers when we did that, but it didn't fundamentally change the job structure of those organizations. It took away lower cost jobs in one area and shifted them to other areas on the whole. Honesty and trust is so integral in this game. And I think the Klarna example that we've heard about a lot recently in the press is case in point here. The interesting thing with that example, though, is that they were replacing relatively mediocre customer service with something that was generative. And so I think there are degrees to which companies will take out sort of the less meaningful support and try and replace it with Gen AI, but the more meaningful roles will carry on exponentially growing. Also, you've got to remember that I was listening to the CIO of NatWest talking the other day about the experiments that they're doing with Gen AI, which are absolutely fascinating. But there's so much inherent in that is our human responsibility to actually make sure that AI is making the right choices. And so all of those roles that didn't necessarily exist before because you had a human in them will now need human moderation. The lovely example she used was that they passed a mortgage applicant through their Gen AI model and said, can Monica, who's 39, has a stable job, get a mortgage? And to their surprise, with all this data about Monica, the AI system said no. And she said, okay, so why can't Monica get a mortgage? Because Monica's lost her job. It's like, well, we haven't given you that piece of information. And they got to the bottom of it. The AI system had referenced Monica from Friends, who at some point in that series had been made redundant and lost her job, and therefore decided that Monica, who was 39 and had a stable income, could not have a mortgage. Totally unforeseen consequences of generative AI. And so yes, there's going to be some cost takeout, but there's also going to be a huge translation of roles around the edges to moderate this as it grows.
So Anne and Graham, thank you very much. We've come to the end of your time. I think we've got a minute left. We're going to go.
Perfect timing.
I want to mention that Miro has a booth. You should come visit them in the sponsor hall here. So how about a hand for Brand and Anne?
Thank you.
Thank you.